rook d2, bishop takes, and of course the f-pawn will be safe in that final position. So that is a win for Denis Lazavik.
And what a fantastic convert and technique that was from the start, getting that middle game, keeping a black inactive in the end game, and finally winning the pawns. Beautiful display of technique there by Denis. He takes the lead, an early lead in the match.
Yeah, an early lead, and especially going back to this position, although maybe Arjun had the slightly better side of things, I don't think it was really a big deal because Denis is perfectly happy to take a draw every time they play this line.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Why fix what's not broken here? Yes, he was slightly worse, but still pretty much under control for the entirety of that game one. He sticks to plan here. And I think his idea is clear. He's playing these solid Berlins with the black pieces to Arjun's e4, but given white, we're going to see those pawn storms. We're going to see early h4 advances by Denis Lazavik. We might even see some pawn gambits. He's going for the aggressive attack with white.
Yep, queen f2, immediately hitting the a-pawn in this variation, slightly different than last time, but the only other option here is maybe playing the move pawn to e6. It is a full pawn sacrifice. I don't know if you really want to pull the trigger on that, but let me tell you, if you don't, bishop e6 is coming, and we're back in the exact same position that we were last time.
And it's an idea we discussed, right? That Arjun wants that bishop to get away, so he can just chuck this pawn, open up the diagonal of his bishop. He knows he's a point down, but it's a bit of a gamble. You give up a pawn, do you have enough to show for it?
I think you go for it, and the reason is that maybe the worst case scenario is you're in an opposite bishop position where you know that black's pawns can't really move anyway. To be honest, after we activate our queen g3, and bring the rook over, I just don't see us being that much worse. So I would probably give it a try. And there you go, pawn e6. I think this is the right decision, Tanya.
Great call there, Aman. The only thing, I feel Arjun had to make it faster, this exact decision, because now he's also got this over a minute deficit on the clock. It still looks like it should be enough for all the reasons that you stated. Queen g3, rook e1, a lot of piece activity. But Denis, he's such a good defender as well.
Yeah, but just picture that last game, all of those rook lift ideas, now defending the pawn on g7 is much more difficult, right? That pawn on e5 being gone helps out a lot. Of course, the fact that you're down a pawn means if you trade things down, it'll be a draw. But you know what? It was going to be a draw anyway, so I like this decision.
Same, and I think Denis has set up rook f8, rook f7, defending that key weakness that you're talking about. Hit that queen, a 7th rank defense on the g7 pawn with that move queen d7, which is why Arjun shifted strategy. He's placed his rook on e5, he's eyeing the g5 square, but also eyeing lining up the queen on that e line with the rook, attacking the bishop in case of rook f8.
Yep, and there's rook e8. So I wonder if queen e3, we're likely to see the idea of bishop back to f7. There's also queen g3, of course, dissuading this bishop f7 move. And then, if rook g5, rook e7 is the intention. You know what you don't want to play, Tanya? Pawn to g6. That is obviously a really, really bad decision and to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah, g6 is suicidal here, with the queen coming to f6, all these holes in front of the black king, which can't be defended. That is definitely not a move that you ever want to make in the opposite color complex. Instead, Denis keeping it solid with a 7th rank defense. Whoa, flashy move there.
Flashy move, but I wonder if it was white's turn again here, I'm not sure what the move would be. So yeah, we see rook to f7, queen slides to h6. It's exclamation marks all around here, but still we are wondering what the threat is. And finally, at least we have one idea. Winning that bishop on e6 at the end of the line, Tanya, and perhaps going into an endgame that could be winning.
That's really nicely pointed out and spotted by you, Aman, that now bishop takes pawn is a threat. And how easy is it to defend it? Because you still can't put your bishop on f5. I think it might lead to, maybe you can put your bishop to f5, but then the e6 pawn is hanging. So moving the bishop is not an option. How are you fighting against bishop takes pawn? All right, bishop f5 it is.
Yeah, the thing is bishop takes pawn is possible, but queen a6, I love this idea because we still have all the pressure on the king side. But guess what, Tanya? even though the pawns are equal, that outside pass pawn will reign supreme in any kind of endgame. Suddenly, opposite bishop endgames are not a guaranteed draw anymore.
It is about the quality of pawns here, and white has a clear passer, right? That a pawn, the hardest to deal with in this position. It's about to start running up the board, which means Denis has to look for counterplay. Arjun's sacrifice with e6 paying dividends right now.
Yeah, I've loved the sacrifice since its inception. It looked like a risk-free sack because, if it's a draw, at least you got the activity. But clearly, he's made Denis pay for it with this game so far, but a lot of work to be done before you call this a win.
But this is a dream position, right? For Arjun, trailing in the match. And to get this, playing e6, winning the a6 pawn, putting the pressure on black, he's got to be enjoying his chances. And the clocks have leveled out.
Completely agree. I also think Denis is in a tough spot because he wants to play a move like h6. First of all, the queen would go side to side, swiping every single pawn in the position. But h6 is the move you want to play to get that king up. And if you play bishop g6 to cut the rook, then you can never really play h6 again because your bishop will be hanging. So there's not a good way to organize the pieces. I don't really see the counterplay. And the a-pawn is just at the end of every variation, you have to worry that all the endgames are losing.
It's a full board press here by white, right? You're playing for the attack on the g-pawn with everything you pointed out, and the a-pawn also you trying to deflect black's defenses. And that's when it becomes extremely hard to hold your position, when you've got both flanks to keep under control. And with the time that Denis is burning, it's clear that it's not an easy task. Attacks the rook.
Yeah, I suspect rook g3, but also this queen, remember, can slide all the way back over to h6. I was actually not expecting h4 because I find it a little bit committal and not in a great way. Just it would be a bit more normal to play h3 the way black wants to play h6, whereas h4, I feel that the light squares are a little bit weak around the king, but nevertheless, certainly not a mistake by any means.
Definitely surprising because it does feel a little loose that now the white rook has to kind of stay on g5, making sure that there's no queen takes pawn at the right moment. You want all your pawns defended. So h4, quite committal here by Arjun, but still problems on Denis. He tries to come in, queen e1 check, winning that h4 pawn.
Yep, this is exactly what I meant when I was looking at the position. The pawn feels a little better on h3, so I was expecting the rook to drop back. Now the queen is feeling a little bit offside, and I mean, the simple question: what do you do about queen to e1? I'm looking at king h2, maybe trying to have this rook come back to g3, but I do think a little bit of counterplay has been found by Denis here.
Definitely feels that way. He does go with the idea, preempting the check, moves the king away. Well, you can't just go queen e4 right now, attacking h4, because watch out for checks on the back rank as well as black.
Yep. Yeah, queen e4. Unfortunately, queen a8 would just win the game in a couple moves. There would be a checkmate to follow if black blocked with the rook. So well spotted. The queen is sort of tied down. Black is desperately trying to play pawn to h6, but it's not possible due to this queen.
Bishop c5, and that gets a double question mark. That is a blunder, and the blue arrow to the rescue. Will Arjun find bishop takes pawn? The f5 bishop's hanging after that.
Yeah, this is the exact same tactic that we looked at when the queen was on h6. So believe me, Arjun knows that this move exists. You just have some double checking to do. Bishop takes here, rook takes, you take on f5. I think queen b8 is just being assessed at the moment because you want to make sure that, you're not blundering a check, maybe a fatal check to your own king.
And I'll just point out, bishop takes pawn, the other pawn on c5 is what Denis has set up because that runs into queen e5 check is what I thought. And then you give a check on e1, pick up the h4 pawn. But of course, Arjun finds it. Bishop takes pawn. Arjun about to equalize this match. If rook takes bishop, you simply pick up the bishop on f5. Your king is safe. You're a happy guy here.
And I was just thinking about bishop to g6 as a potential move. It doesn't get played. Rook takes g7, rook takes f5. I am wondering about this queen b8. But the problem for black is that the king is going to be in serious trouble the second that white is allowed to get a check in.
And he just falls back to the first rank. You don't want to go to h3. That is a mate in one on the g3 square. He comes back, and to your point, just not enough time to capture on b2. He's setting up queen e1 check.
Yeah, if queen f6, queen e1, you think you're defending on h4, but maybe the idea is king h2, queen g3. But the nice thing about queen f6 is you can play rook f1 in that position.
I completely missed that, Aman. I thought queen f6, and the point you wanted to show was queen e1, queen g3. But actually, rook f1 does get set up, and Arjun does find it. He goes into a rook pawn endgame. He's up a pawn, but Denis is setting up ideas of creating a parcel with d4, looking for counterplay.
So I think the idea is you bring your king over here, because if black keeps pushing, you'll slot your king in front of the pawn. Is this a winning endgame? It remains to be seen. White with a good chance due to the pawns on opposite sides of the board here. I don't think you want to move your a pawn, because the idea is you want to win the c pawn and guard that all-important a pawn on c4.
And also just how close the c-pawn is to the white king. The white rook doing a fantastic job of keeping the black rook tied down. a5 will be defended laterally, and here, can white just go king d2? And he does it, driving the defensive rook away, about to win the c4 pawn.
Yeah, and it's really important to note how he went. By the way, rook g5, is that...
Oh.
I'm not sure if rook g5, but it looked just completely winning there. This will do it as well, I think.
But that was the cleanest. If you spot rook g5, and I think that was the blind spot there, you play rook g5, a pure king pawn endgame. That would have probably been resignation on the spot, but Arjun, he's got a clear path. Now the white king assisting the pawn up the board, and the white rook beautifully guarding everything on the fourth rank, including his own pawn.
Yep, and that is, maybe not that rook g5 you're looking for, but you know what?